August 1945. The fighting stopped, and the Pacific grew quiet. Silence spread from Hiroshima's ruins to the dark sea. The word surrender was shared in soft voices, heavy like stone. 5 days later, a ship left Guam, heading east. It carried fewer than 300 Japanese women, nurses, clerks, and radio workers from broken units and hospitals. They wore thin gloves against the wet air and had almost nothing with them. The ship smelled of fuel, salt, and the faint, sweet smell of American cigarettes. Yumiko Era stood by a small window, her notebook hidden in her coat. She was 24, from Nagasaki. She had learned to clean needles until they bent and to save bandages like they were gold. The ship's engine noise made her nervous. She watched the water trail behind into the dark and wondered how a country full of rumors could face the truth. Above, American guards' boots hit the deck in a steady beat. They were young, some barely older than the women, but they looked different. Tall, strong, with wide shoulders and neat uniforms. Their boots were shiny, belts tight. They held rifles like they were light. Their laughter carried across the deck, pushed by the wind. Chika Sato stood next to Yumiko. At 20, she was thin, quick, her voice sharp like a spark. Okinawa showed her America's power. But seeing the guards up close was new. She watched how they walked, how they carried their rifles easily. Then she leaned in, her voice soft over the sound of waves. They seem unreal. The words stuck between them like a knife. The next morning, the women were called to the deck. The sky was gray, the sea rough. An American sergeant walked along the line, sleeves up, arms tanned. He gave each woman a tin cup of water. When he reached Yumiko, she paused. The cup was cool, the act simple. "Here," he said, like it was nothing special. She drank the fresh water and froze. It felt so normal it shook her. Below, the dining area smelled of things they hadn't had in years: warm white bread, sweet peaches and syrup, strong coffee. Some women ate slowly, afraid the food would be taken. Others hid bread in their sleeves. A few cried quietly. That night, the ship creaked as it moved. In the dim light, Hayoko Nishida, 19, opened her notebook. She wrote what she saw of the guard's height, the food portions, the shiny rifles. She tried to make sense of it with numbers. Yumiko lay awake, still hearing the sergeant's voice. The ship kept going, its metal frame straining. Somewhere, a door slammed, leaving a sharp sound in the dark. Through the window, the water trailed white against black. Ahead, the sea hid the ship's path, and a single buoy's light blinked once in the fog, then disappeared. The trip took 10 days. 10 days of rolling waves, tin cups, and a heavy silence full of questions no one asked aloud. The women lived between two worlds, one falling apart behind them, one unknown ahead. Meals came regularly. Soft white bread, canned peaches in sweet syrup, dark coffee poured freely. To women who saved tiny bits of rice, this plenty felt like a shock. Some ate carefully, thinking it was a trick. Others ate fast, hiding bread in their sleeves, not trusting it would last. A few cried as they ate, tasting not sweetness, but shame. How could an enemy feed them better than their own country? On the 10th morning, the fog cleared and San Francisco appeared. The women crowded the rails, staring through salty air. Tall steel and glass buildings rose up. The red Golden Gate Bridge stretched across the bay like a door to another world. Below, trucks moved through streets, honking, shining, endless. For many, it was their first look at a Western city, not the twisted pictures from propaganda. Kiko held the rail, her face pale. "They said America was falling apart," she whispered. "Then what is this?" They got off the ship quickly. Guards led them down a ramp to waiting trains. The train cars rattled east, wheels clanking steadily. Through the windows they saw fields of wheat like seas, orchards full of fruit, wide pastures with fat cows under a big sky. Every mile proved their leaders' words wrong. They remembered the slogans, "America is starving, America is weak." But at every station, healthy children waved, their clothes clean, their cheeks pink. Hyoko wrote fast in her notebook, her breath fogging the window. "If this is a dying country," she wrote, "then the world is upside down." The train's steady rhythm became proof they couldn't ignore. The women sat straight, eyes stuck to the windows, unable to look away. Each sight hit hard. Barns full of hay, endless trucks on far roads, shiny steel bridges. In one car, Yumiko held her notebook tightly. She remembered Nagasaki's hospital, its worn-out bandages boiled thin. Now she counted trucks on the road and felt sick. If America could give so much to its land, what did it give its armies? The train rolled deeper into the country. Dusk turned the sky red, and town lights blinked on, one after another, steady. Inside the car, No one spoke. The only sounds were the wheels and their held breath. By night, one truth grew clear. The propaganda was breaking. No rumor could explain cities of glass, rivers of trucks, or orchards heavy with fruit. Each mile showed betrayal. The train stopped in Wisconsin, steam hissing into the cool fall air. The women got off quietly, boots crunching on gravel, eyes scanning the pine forests around them. Beyond the trees was their new prison, Camp McCoy. They expected mud and barbed wire, harsh treatment. Instead, they smelled fresh bread, warm and yeasty, from nearby kitchens. The barracks were wooden, clean, with neat rows of buildings. Windows shone in the light. Guards watched, but they looked calm, almost bored, like they were watching the schoolyard, not prisoners. The biggest shock was the showers. Pipes rattled, then hot water poured out endlessly. Steam wrapped the women like a new layer of skin. For years they had bathed in small basins, saving heat, boiling water drop by drop. Here, the taps never stopped. One shy nurse asked through a translator how long they could stay under. The American woman looked confused. "Until you're clean, honey." The answer hit harder than a slap. In a world of scarcity, every drop counts. In a world of plenty, the question doesn't make sense. Days turned into routines: roll call at dawn, work tasks, meals on time. At first, the women expected cruelty, some hidden trap. Instead, they found something harder to handle: endless plenty. For Yumiko, now working in the infirmary, it was overwhelming. Cabinets were full of bandages, drawers had new syringes, bottles of antiseptic were opened for tiny cuts, and penicillin was stacked like it was nothing. At home, she reused needles until they dulled and saved one bandage for days. Here, Margaret Collins, a Red Cross nurse, opened a new package, used half, and threw the rest away. Each time Yumiko flinched, a word came to her: wasteful. She whispered it like a prayer, hoping it would keep her tied to her old world. But the waste kept coming, wearing her down. Hiko faced her own struggle in the kitchens. The storeroom smelled of flour and coffee, thick with sugar and spices. Shelves sagged with canned fruit. Each morning she saw cooks crack dozens of eggs, mixing them into big bowls until they shone. After meals, she saw those bowls scraped into trash bins. One evening, she was told to throw out a whole loaf of bread, still warm. She held it, feeling her legs shake. She thought of Okinawa, her brother eating burned potato skins to stop his hunger. The bread fell into the bin with a thud. She cried into her sleeve while the cooks passed by, not noticing. Hayoko tried to fight the flood with logic. In her notebook, she wrote down everything: food amounts compared to body weight, guards' heights, the number of supply trucks each day. She hoped to find a flaw, a reason this plenty was a trick. But the numbers showed the truth: a country not just winning, but overflowing with strength. At night, the three women talked quietly on their cots. Yumiko still said, wasteful like a shield. Hiko stared at her hands, thinking of the bread. Hyoko read her notes, looking for gaps that didn't exist. It wasn't torture that broke them. Torture they could have fought together. What broke them was the easy, endless plenty, the way Americans threw away what the Japanese would have died for. The quiet message was clear: we can waste because we have more than you can imagine. Outside, trucks rolled through the gates, their lights sweeping the barracks. Each light was another proof, not with cruelty, but with the steady beat of abundance. Nights at Camp McCoy were the hardest. Floodlights cut through the dark, guards' steps passed in a steady rhythm, then faded. Inside, silence pressed close until whispers started. They whispered because they couldn't stay quiet. The plenty, the kindness, the endless supplies didn't fit. Their minds searched for answers, building weak walls of denial where propaganda had crumbled. Actors, one nurse said. These guards aren't real soldiers. They're picked for their size, like props in a play. Another said the food was a trick. They're fattening us for questioning or work. Just wait. The guards stayed the same, quick, polite, distant. The kitchens kept making bread, coffee, butter. The showers stayed hot. No cruelty came. No trap appeared. One evening, the truth hit harder. Supply trucks came from nearby towns. The women pressed against the windows, watching the drivers. They weren't soldiers, just farmers, carpenters, clerks, laughing as they unloaded crates. Yet they were tall, strong, healthier than the best Japanese officers the women had seen. The whispers stopped. No stage could explain ordinary people looking like this. Hayoko shut her notebook with a snap. She had tried to keep the theories alive, to let numbers prove them wrong. But the math was clear, the guards were strong, the food was real, the trucks kept coming. The lie was falling apart. For Kiko, the doubt was too much. She lay awake, seeing her brother's thin face in Okinawa, then the driver tossing flour sacks like they were nothing. She touched her ribs, feeling her bones. Yumiko whispered wasteful in the dark, as if it could protect her from the contradictions. But even that word was losing strength. Torture would have united them, made them stronger. But this steady kindness, this easy strength forced each woman to face it alone. Every contradiction hit in the quiet space between heartbeats. The whispers grew softer each night, less sure. Doubt had spread, and silence was heavier than words. Outside, the Wisconsin night stretched cold and wide. A train whistle echoed across the dark fields, another sign of power moving easily through the land. Inside, Yumiko clenched her jaw, Kiko gripped her blanket, and Hyoko held her trembling notebook. The whispers faded. The truth was taking their place. November brought cold winds to Wisconsin. The trees were bare, branches rattling in the gray sky. The prisoners pulled their coats tight, expecting another dull day. Instead, the guards brought bats, gloves, and a worn leather ball. A baseball game was starting. The women moved toward the fence, curious. They had heard of baseball but never seen it. What they saw wasn't just a game, it was a shock. The bat's crack split the air like a gunshot. The ball flew high, followed by laughter. Men ran fast, rounding bases with power that seemed impossible. They threw the ball far, dust rising as boots hit the ground. Kiko gripped the fence, the wire cutting into her hands. Her throat tightened. She remembered the weak, clumsy Americans in propaganda pictures, but these men were strong, fast, alive. She looked at her thin arms and the tired faces around her, worn by years of little food. Her voice broke as she whispered, "They run like the war never touched them. And look at us. We're shadows." Her words hit the others like a punch. The game went on, loud and happy. The guards cheered, their laughter carrying across the field. It wasn't the laugh of winners, but of men playing, untouched by hunger or despair. Each cheer drove the truth deeper. Strength wasn't a lie, it was real, right there. Hyoko watched, hands on the wire. In Nagasaki, she had bandaged soldiers with empty eyes and weak bodies, men called Japan's pride. Now she saw these players running easily, laughing in the cold air. The difference was too much. The game ended with a cheer, the ball hitting a glove with a sharp sound. The players clapped each other's backs, their breath clouding in the fall air. Then they walked off, as if it was nothing special. But for the women at the fence, everything had changed. No meal, no ration card, no whispered denial could erase what they saw. This wasn't plenty in bread or soap, it was plenty in the body itself. The field emptied, dust settled, the fence stayed cold under their hands. In the silence after the last cheer, the women stood still, unable to turn away. October brought paper and pens to the barracks. Guards set out neat stacks, envelopes with Red Cross stamps. The women were told they could write home, for many the first time in over a year. It sounded easy, but when Yumiko sat at her desk, pen ready, her hand wouldn't move. How could she describe this place? Bread that never ran out, hot water that kept flowing, guards who laughed instead of shouted. Telling the truth would hurt. Hiding it felt like betrayal. She thought of her sister in Nagasaki's ruins. What words wouldn't harm her? She tried facts. I am healthy. I am safe. But her pen shook. Finally, she wrote one line, hoping her sister would understand. I live where hot water never stops. The barracks buzzed with the same struggle. Some worried their words would be changed. Others stared at blank pages, caught between silence and truth. For hours, the room held only the sound of pens pausing, starting, stopping. Hiko broke first. She pressed her pen hard, marking the paper deeply. Her letter was bold, full of loyalty to the emperor, knowing the Americans would read it. Writing gave her relief, a way to shout silently. They wrote to a homeland that didn't match what they knew. That night, the unease grew. They imagined their families reading, shaking their heads, thinking them changed or weak. They pictured hungry children laughing at stories of wasted bread or endless soap. The gap between their new world and their old one grew wider with every thought. In the dark barracks, the women whispered softly, "How can we tell them?" The truth was too sharp, too dangerous. Outside, frost covered the windows. A guard's boots crunched on gravel. Somewhere, a stamp marked each envelope with one word, passed. The letters began their long trip across the sea, fragile links to a lost world. Inside, the women lay awake, hearing the wind against the walls, a sound their families would never hear. Winter gripped Wisconsin. Snow piled high against the barracks. The women wrapped their thin coats tight, their breath clouding. Then came news, a lecture in the hall. They sat on creaking benches. An American officer spoke, his voice calm, an interpreter repeating in Japanese. He talked of factories, shipyards, endless trucks. Most of it passed over them until he said aircraft. In 1944, he said, America built over 96,000 planes. The words hit like a rock in water. Silence. Then a sharp gasp. Hayoko's pencil stopped. She wrote the number carefully, her hand shaking. 96,000. Her mind raced, comparing. Japan's best was 28,000 planes, a huge gap. Her pencil fell, rolling across the floor. She didn't notice. The room stirred with murmurs. Some shook their heads, whispering lies or trick, but most stared at the interpreter, stunned. Numbers don't lie. For Yumiko, the number tied together everything, the trucks, the full storerooms, the steady medicine. If America could build 96,000 planes in 1 year, how could Japan have hope to win? She closed her notebook, hands folded. Kiko's fists tightened until her nails hurt. She remembered the slogans, spirit can beat any weakness, but the math was cruel. Spirit meant nothing against steel. After, the women walked into the snow, shoes crunching together. The air was cold, the sky gray. No one spoke. The number stuck to them, heavier than chains. But that night, the barracks were restless. Some still said America exaggerated to break them, but the words sounded weak. Yoko lay staring at the ceiling, the number circling her mind. She thought of her notebook's numbers, guards' heights, food weights, truck counts. They all fit the officer's words. The number wasn't a lie. It was the missing piece. She pressed her hands over her eyes, holding back tears. It wasn't anger, but grief, deep and empty. Their leaders knew. They sent them anyway. Outside, snow hissed against the barracks. Inside, Yumiko shook, Kiko whispered, Hayoko stared. Above them, the number hung in the dark, colder than winter, 96,000 planes in 1 year. The number stayed like frost in their bones. Days passed, but it wouldn't leave. Slowly, grief turned sharper. Their anger shifted no longer at the guards, but across the Pacific, to Tokyo, to leaders who knew and promised victory while sending them to lose. The barracks whispers changed. Gone were ideas of a plenty or chosen giants. Instead, a harder question grew. Why? Why were they sent to a war they couldn't win? Why did their families starve while America's factories made thousands of machines? Some couldn't face it, holding on to myths of spiritual strength. They said America's plenty was empty, that steel couldn't match Japan's soul. But the words sounded hollow, spoken to themselves. The breaking point came one cold evening at roll call. Snow swirled in the floodlights. Names echoed off the walls. Then a woman, Sachiko, a quiet nurse, snapped. She stepped forward, fists tight, shouting in Japanese, "They betrayed us. They knew we couldn't win, and they sent us anyway." Her cries rang into the night. The guards froze, shocked. The women stood still, their breath in the light. No one stopped her. Her grief was theirs. Her rage was theirs. Then silence fell, deep and final. Only the snow moved. Sachiko fell, sobbing, face in her hands. That night, Mumiko opened her notebook. Her hand was steady for the first time. She wrote, "They said Americans were weak, but I saw one man carry crates that would break 5 of ours. They said America starved, but I eat more here in a day than my family did in a week. They said America was broken, but the children beyond the fence run tall and fearless." She paused, then wrote what she feared. Every lie feels like another death. The women lay on their cots, hearing the wind, Sachiko's scream echoing. They weren't just America's prisoners now, they were prisoners of a truth too heavy to carry, one that broke their loyalty and left them bare in the cold. Spring came slowly to Wisconsin. Snow melted into slush and the barracks smelled of wet pine. The women carried their betrayal quietly, but the final proof came in envelopes from Red Cross officials, reports and photos from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Rumors of a new bomb, a flash that erased cities, had reached them. Some believed, most didn't. But the photos ended doubt. They showed flat streets, buildings as steel skeletons, walls with human shadows burned in, faces scarred beyond knowing, eyes empty with pain. The women passed the photos, hands shaking. No one spoke. Hyoko dropped her notebook. For months, it held her logic, numbers against disbelief. But these weren't numbers. They were people, children turned to ash, mothers holding nothing. Her hands shook too much to pick it up. Yumiko froze at a photo of Nagasaki's ruins, the cathedral's broken dome. Her chest emptied. She whispered, "My home. My home is gone." For days, the camp felt covered. Guards spoke softly. Meals were silent. Even children's laughter from town sounded far away. The truth sank in like ice. The leaders who lied about America's weakness, who sent them to a lost war, refused to surrender. Their refusal brought this destruction. Lies didn't just break trust, they burned cities to ash. One evening, as the sun set red over melting snow, Kiko stood at the window. The light turned the snowblood red. She turned to her friends, voice low but steady. "They took everything, our brothers, homes, pride, all for a war they knew was a lie." She looked at the clean barracks, warm kitchens, shelves of medicine. "If this is defeat," she said, "what was our victory supposed to be?" Her words sank into the quiet. No one answered. The barracks held its breath. Outside, snowmelt dripped from the roof, marking the silence with a steady beat. Winter eased. Snow melted, leaving wet ground. Inside Camp McCoy, another change began, quieter but steady. Rage cooled. Despair faded. Instead, a new curiosity grew, to understand the enemy's world, not deny it. English stopped sounding like noise, it became a puzzle, keys to America's strength. Kiko, once the loudest doubter, changed first. She stopped saying the bread was fake or guards were actors. In the infirmary, she started talking with Margaret Collins. At first, simple words, bandages, medicines, symptoms, then bolder questions. Could American women pick their husbands? Study like men? Say no? Margaret answered patiently. Yumiko saw power wasn't just steel, it was freedom. Hiyoko's notebook changed too. Instead of trucks and rations, she wrote thoughts. Our defeat isn't just military, it's spiritual. We lived in mirrors, seeing only what leaders showed us. Here, I see my own face for the first time. Evenings had a new rhythm. Insects buzzed outside. The barracks smelled of pine and pencils scratched. The women whispered English words, freedom, bread, future, each one heavy, dangerous, a step away from their old nation. The contradictions had broken through. Now came the harder part, living without the lies. Kiko studied by candlelight. Yumiko replayed Margaret's voice. Hayoko wrote steadily, trying to capture what couldn't be explained. Outside, snowmelt dripped, marking time. Inside, the women stayed awake, no longer soldiers, not yet free, but searching for a new reality. Summer 1946. Grass grew tall and green at Camp McCoy. The news came plainly. Many prisoners would go home. The words shook the camp. Relief should have come, but feelings tangled. Home meant family, familiar voices, their own land. But it also meant ruin, bombed cities, empty fields, a nation on its knees. Some whispered of staying, dreaming of a new start in America, a place that had, in its strange plenty, changed them. Others wanted Japan, even if only rubble waited. The night before leaving, Yumiko, Kiko, and Hiyoko sat under floodlights. Insects hummed in the warm air. They spoke softly, words fragile. Hunger at home, plenty here. How can both exist? Kiko's eyes were dark. What's loyalty now? To leaders who lied, who sent us to lose? Hayoko stared at the trees beyond the fence. After a long silence, she said, "Maybe our duty isn't obedience, it's truth. If we go back with open eyes, we can help others see." The next morning, they boarded a train east. The cars rattled across the Midwest, windows showing America's last sights, endless fields, busy factories, strong steel bridges. The women pressed their faces to the glass, each mile widening the gap between what they were taught and what they saw. At San Francisco, a ship waited. They stood on deck as it pulled away, the shore fading into fog. The Golden Gate's towers stood tall. They held the rails, watching the land disappear. They came to America as enemies, soldiers of a holy empire. They lived as prisoners, their beliefs broken bit by bit. Now they left as something new, not captives, not just women in uniform, but witnesses to plenty, freedom, and lies exposed by truth. The sea stretched ahead, gray and endless. Behind, the shore vanished. Japan waited, ashes, hunger, uncertainty. The three friends stood together, wind pulling at their coats. Each carried a heavy load, to return with testimony, not just memories. The ship moved east, across the Pacific, its wake fading into the deep. On deck, the women watched America's last trace, unwilling to blink, as if holding the sight would give them strength for what lay ahead. The story of Camp McCoy's women is quiet. No medals, no parades, no flags waving. Their war wasn't on beaches or in skies. It was fought in silent barracks, kitchen smells, the shock of endless hot water. Their defeat wasn't from gunfire, it was from white bread, children laughing beyond defense, trucks rolling through gates. Each small detail cut deeper than bombs because it showed their world was a lie. For years they lived in mirrors, fed false images. At McCoy, the mirrors broke. Behind them wasn't a monster, but a country of plenty, contradictions, and freedoms they never imagined. The strongest weapon wasn't steel or fire, it was the contradiction. A thrown-away loaf of bread. A sergeant giving water easily. They were caught between carrying a burden heavier than chains, knowledge. As the ship crossed the Pacific, they returned as witnesses, proof that lies fall when faced with simple truth. Their testimony would be heavy, even dangerous. Speaking truth would hurt families already scarred. Staying silent would betray the truth they learned. Both choices hurt, but they knew pain wasn't the worst fate, blindness was. Their story isn't about barracks or fences. It's about facing a reality bigger than the stories they were raised on. It's about the quiet fall of certainty and the fragile start of doubt. The women carried this home. Some wrote careful letters. Some spoke softly to friends. Some stayed silent, haunted, but each held proof that strength isn't just in armies or weapons. Strength is in a nation's truth. The Pacific closed behind them. Japan waited, scarred and hungry. On the ship's deck, the women stood at the rail, wind in their hair. They didn't know what words they'd choose. All they knew was their old world had burned, and in its ashes, something fragile and uncertain had begun.